Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on prepping for the July 2020 MCT. Now, before we cut to the chase, I'm going to give a quick introduction to the QLTS Geek team, who are also the speakers for today. So I'm Priyasha Kwari, and I'm a corporate and commercial lawyer based in Dubai. Cherry, my colleague, is also a corporate and commercial lawyer in Dubai, and both of us cleared the MCT in 2017. A little bit about QLTS Geek. So QLTS Geek was founded in 2018 with the objective of helping candidates qualify as a solicitor in England and Wales. And our objective was to essentially provide bite-sized information over a handy app. Now, we're sort of in the process of rebuilding the app and adding more features. Fortunately, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of background sound in the background. Yeah, so we're actually sort of going to be launching the app very soon. So follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram for updates on the launch. Now, for July MCT 2020 test takers, we're actually sort of providing early access to practice questions. So if you've opted in to receive our emails, you will be receiving an email very soon. And if you haven't opted in, then just follow us on social media and you will sort of obtain updates in this respect. Now, if you can just give me a minute, I am just going to make sure that I'm sort of toned down the background sound from my. Yeah, this is what happens when you try to conduct a webinar from home, you get a lot of background sounds. Great. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the agenda for today's session. So first, we're going to cover how to study SMART for the MCT, especially if you just have 2 weeks left for the assessment. Second is we're going to discuss a few tips on how to approach your preparation, particularly if you bump into certain stumbling blocks. Third, it's important to understand the MCT marking criteria because you want to make sure that you're maxing your scores for the assessment. Fourth, you also need to know what to expect on the D-Day so that you can prepare yourself accordingly. And fifth, time management is very essential in the test because we all know this is essentially a marathon. The test is over 5 hours, so you need to make sure that you are geared for the test. And finally, we're going to have an interactive Q&A session where you can discuss your questions, and we're going to open the platform for an interactive session. Great, so let's get started. Now, how do you study SMART for the MCT? Now, the foremost tip with respect to this is essentially practice, practice, and practice. Now, it's very important to read your books, but at the same time, it is equally critical to practice your questions. And the reason being is that when you practice questions, you sort of understand your strengths, you understand your weaknesses, and you understand the important topics that you need to cover for the assessment. So this sort of helps you tailor your studies and you sort of know how to actually approach your studies. Now, one point to bear in mind is that in the MCT, most of the questions are case studies. Now, the thing about case studies is that you don't really know whether you've actually grasped a concept until you actually attempt a case study. Another point about case studies is that when you actually practice a case study, what happens is you sort of retain and understand the concept better because you're actually seeing that concept being applied. So from this perspective, the advice that I have is don't get into the mindset of, oh, you know what, I'm going to first, finish my coursework and then I will get into the practice questions. Because this is a mistake that I see a lot of candidates make. And the issue with this is that if you try to complete your coursework, what happens is you don't really have enough time left for the mock test. Also, another thing is by the time you reach your mock tests, you sort of don't really know how to get back to your studies and how to sort of change your approach while you are preparing. So my advice to you is push yourself to start practicing mock tests if you haven't. And if you're also taking the MCT at a later stage, which is August or even in January, I would say start practicing mock tests as soon as possible. The second tip that I have is to focus on summaries. Now, it's important to get a macro view of the subject, and then you sort of get into the details. So personally, an approach that I like to follow is to get a good summary of the subject. So read a very good summary of the subject. Second, attempt practice questions or a mock test. Now, what happens with this approach is that this helps me understand what are the important topics to cover. And then I sort of get into the details. And when you sort of get into the details, you sort of know what areas to focus on. And second, you're also sort of confident because you know what to sort of expect in a mock test. And so you sort of know, so you sort of like gauge how to sort of tailor your, your prep for the assessment. The third tip is, and this is something that I'm again going to cover in detail in the next slide, and that is don't be hung up on difficult topics. Move on. And the reason being is that your goal is to pass the assessment. You're not really aiming to be a topper of the MCT. Well, definitely 4 to 6 months back, your goal would have been to actually learn all the subjects well. But now that you've reached the last mile of your preparation, you sort of want to make sure that you're passing the assessment. So if you're stuck somewhere, don't panic. Max your scores on the subjects that you find easy, and that will sort of get you through the finishing line. Now, how do you approach difficult topics? Like I said earlier, don't spend too much time on topics you cannot understand in the last couple of weeks. What you could do is, again, the second two tips are sort of related, and I can probably explain this best with an example. But I'm going to quickly say that, try to understand the concept and the theory, especially if you find a particular topic difficult. Like, for example, let's take the case of corporate taxes. When I was taking the MCT, I sort of left, certain topics to the end, which was the wrong approach. So I realized that I wouldn't really be able to attempt any questions on corporate tax because, the calculations were taking too long, and I wasn't even sure whether I was sort of on the right track. So what I did was I sort of read the theory surrounding corporate taxes as well as, I guess, inheritance tax. And I decided that if I did come across a question which involved calculations, I would sort of just make an intelligent guess. And that's what I did. And that was useful because what happened was there were certain theoretical questions that came for the MCT covering these topics, and I was able to attempt them. So remember that any topic which involves calculations could also sort of involve questions with respect to theory. So just keep that in mind. So sometimes you might not want to leave a topic altogether. You can sort of read the theory, understand the concept, and you might just be able to either attempt the question or you can even make an intelligent guess. Another topic that a lot of people sort of find difficult is, solicitor's account. And I would again say that with respect to solicitor's account, there is a pattern that is generally followed in each in each question. So try to understand the pattern. And once you've gotten hold of the pattern, then you can actually eliminate the wrong answers. So what happens is you can actually take an intelligent guess and increase your odds of getting the right answer. On that note, one of my colleagues is also going to sort of be conducting a small session on solicitor's gown, maybe this week or the next. So if you are sort of prepping for the July 2028 MCT, you might want to just attend that session. She's going to cover certain basic concepts that's going to help you get an overview of, you know, how to tackle the questions. And I think that's going to be very useful to many of you. So that's about it from my end. And I'm going to hand over the platform to Cherry. She's going to cover the MCT marking criteria, which is very important for you to understand. Also what to expect on the D-Day and how you manage the time on for the assessment. All right, over to you, Cherry. Do I need to unmute you? Let me just check. Okay.
Hi,
so,
Priyasha.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Cherry.
Hello, everyone.
Sorry.
I'm just having some issues turning my video on. My apologies for that, but I think we can continue without my video. Hi, everyone.
That's no problem.
Priyasha did introduce me. I'll just give a brief introduction of myself. I'm Cherry Bhatnagar. I am a corporate and commercial lawyer in the UAE. And as Priyasha mentioned, I took my MCT in 2017, and I'm now preparing for the OSCE. Priyasha, thank you very much for the lovely insights that you've given into your personal experience. I think it's very, very important to have that hands-on experience when you step into the examination center, and particularly at this stage. What I'm going to be covering right now is the MCT marking criteria and what to bear in your mind, particularly in accordance with the marking and moderation policy. So the good part about this exam is that there is no negative marking. You don't need to be bothered about any marks being deducted for a wrong response. So our personal recommendation to you is please leave no questions unanswered. Answer each question to the best of your ability. Every correct response would receive 1 mark. And there is an option called mark for review. Utilize it as much as you can. I will cover it more in the following slides. But wherever you feel that you have a doubt about a question and you would like to reconsider your response, mark it for review and come back to it. Please bear in mind that multiple answers will not be counted. You would not be able to secure any marks for those, and you just sadly lose any, even if you would have just guessed the correct answer, you would just lose marks for that. So just bear that in mind. One question that we come across very frequently is that are candidates required to pass every subject? Are they supposed to get equal number or passing marks in every subject? But that's not the case. The marks for the 2 parts of the MCT will be aggregated to derive the overall percentage marks. And the pass marks are determined by the standard setting panel convened by the SRA. Priyasha, if you could just go to the next slide. Okay, so preparing for the D-Day. As much as you need to prepare for the exam, you really need to be physically and mentally prepared for the exam. This exam just doesn't test you on your knowledge of law and the subjects. It really tests your patience. 2 hours, 45 minutes into 2 sessions, and then an hour of break. And your commute time to the center, depending on how far or how close you are located, it's pretty much a whole day where you're engaged. So it's very important that while you're prepared well for the exam, you are physically and mentally ready as well. Rest very well a night before. You will need all your energy and you'll need all your enthusiasm for the exam. We would personally suggest you to leave ahead of time, even if you know that your center well. Just make sure to consider the traffic situation or any unforeseen circumstance, and please leave ahead of time. Eat well, 2 hours, 45 minutes, no break time. You will be just sitting over there. So make sure that you have had enough food to keep you going for those 2 hours, 45 minutes. And if you are somebody like me who would have, who utilize their 1 hour lunch break also to do quick last minute revision, please carry food with yourself. Anything that could be snacks, anything that gives you energy, just carry that. One very important thing I would like to stress over here is that less discussions are more. Once you reach the center, you will find all kind of students, and every individual is different, and every individual has their own way of preparing. Do not get influenced by last minute discussions and lose your confidence over there. I personally made sure that I did not involve into any discussions, and I just focused on what I had studied. You've had enough time to prepare, you have prepared enough. Just make the best use of your energy and do not get involved into any last minute discussions.
Okay.
Also, if there are any special arrangements that you need the center to make for you, please inform the center in advance so that at the last minute there are no surprises. And last but not the least, keep calm and keep composed. You've got it. So coming to your preparations now, Priyasha has covered in detail what would be very helpful in these last 2 weeks of your studies. Looking at the last minute revisions, we strongly recommend not to read any new stuff that you have not touched in the past, stuff that you may not have enough time to consider. Just leave it. What you've read is enough, and just focus on that and make sure you attempt well. Say 24 hours before the exam, I would strongly recommend that you revise selectively. Areas that you feel you are weak at, or areas where you feel you need to just go through your notes once again, please pick them up, go through them. Areas that you're extremely confident, yes, it's definitely beneficial to just pass through them. Just keep in that zone. Keep your mind occupied. Just be in that zone of the exam without stressing about it. Uh, and you'll get through this. Use your flashcards or any summary notes that you've available, or there's something that you've just customized for yourself. They come in very, very handy because you know how you understand things, and you understand a certain language. So just make good use of any summary notes that you have. Another thing that's very, very helpful is short audio recordings. Now, for example, let's say there is a particular subject or a particular topic that is very lengthy to read. You could actually leave yourself a small voice note or a small recording, and while you are traveling to the center or in your break time, you could just listen to it and just revise the subject. So these recordings make a very excellent last minute revision tools. As I mentioned previously, use your break time judiciously. Do not involve in any discussions that may have the impact of lessening your confidence. Keep the positivity, keep the energy going, and you've got it. Well, this is a very important topic coming to I would say the last slide of this presentation, time management during the exam. When you get your access to the system, please read the instructions carefully and read them once again to make sure you've covered everything. The exam is in 2 sessions, 2 hours, 45 minutes, the first session, then you've got a lunch break, and then you've got another session. So basically you've got 165 minutes for 90 questions, which rounding off come around approximately 2 minutes per question. Well, what I would suggest you to do is not to consume the entire time for solving one question, because some questions could be extremely straightforward, but then for some questions, you may have to reconsider. During the exam, you may actually feel that you've answered a question, but you may need to go back to it, review it, and just give some more time to it. So I would say just please keep some time in reserve. Whatever time you allocate to solving the question, divide that time, solve the question, revise the question, and then go forward. Please keep on utilizing the mark for review option at any place you feel you're stuck. Just don't waste your time over there. Mark it for review, go to the next question, and you can always come back to this question. Also, at this point, I would like to reiterate, bear in mind that even if you mark for review, do not leave questions unanswered. Towards the end of the exam, you may or may not find time to go back to all the questions that are marked for review. So it would be helpful just to answer the question, whatever you feel, either using your knowledge or your elimination skills, whatever you feel right is at that time, and then go ahead. Please keep on regularly monitoring the timer on the screen. You're not allowed to wear watches at the exam, so make sure that you keep on monitoring the time. And utilize the white space. If you feel that you're very good at calculations using a pen and paper, please utilize the white space. However you feel comfortable, you can use that space to gather your thoughts, and for anything, just make sure that you're answering all the questions and you're just keeping a track on the timer.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Cherry. In fact, I have another point that maybe I could add here, is that one of the ways that you can actually save time is during your assessment is to read the question stub, because if you've actually had a look at a mock question for the MCT, you have like a small paragraph and then they have like a small question stub. So what you could do is you could actually read the question first, and then you go and read the paragraph. So then you sort of know what to look out for in terms of the information that you need, because sometimes they give you information that you don't really need to answer the question. So read the question first, and then you can go about, read the paragraph, and then you can actually attempt the question. I don't know, but this is something that sort of personally sort of helped me. So I don't know whether, you might want to sort of adopt that approach as well. Great. So yeah, I think that's what we have for today in terms of, what you sort of need to cover for the MCT. And of course, like I said, everybody's individual approach is different. So make sure that you also understand yourself and the approach that you want to follow. Maybe what we could do is we could open the session for questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I actually don't like to share my screen because then I can't see anybody and it makes it less interactive. So let me see let me go over the questions right from the beginning. Great. Sure. When can we have the app on the Apple Play Store soon? It is going to be up soon. It's a little difficult because to predict at the moment, because we're sort of, sometimes technical glitches happen. So we're hoping that it's resolved as soon as possible, but the web app will be up very soon. So like I said, we'll send you an email update in the next couple of days. Okay. All right. There's another question. What is mark for review? Yes. So the thing is that mark for review is an option where you can sort of mark a question that you want to come back to later. So once you've sort of completed all your questions, you sort of enter a screen which sort of, it's like a screen with a grid of all the questions, of 90 questions. You will sort of see all your answers as well as those questions you've actually marked for review. So if you want to get back to a particular question, all you have to do is click on that particular question to get back to it, and you can sort of change your answer or even sort of amend. Essentially amend your answer, or sort of stick to it. So there will be a button at the top of each screen, when you're sort of attempting your questions, and you can actually mark for review. And I think you can also sort of go to the final screen where you can see the grid with all your questions and answers. So yeah, it's a very helpful tool if you sort of are not sure about something and you want to get back to later. You can definitely use that. Do they provide a calculator? Yes. Someone's already answered, so thank you very much. Where do we put our materials and personal items? Cherry, you want to take that?
Yeah, you would actually get a locker over there. You will be assigned a locker where you keep your personal belongings, your notes, your cell phone, and watches. So feel free to carry your notes to the center because you would be provided with a dedicated space. But having said that, this would differ from center to center. So I would actually recommend that you call the center prior to the exam and check if they have the provisions.
Yeah, in fact, another point that I'd like to add as well is that, sometimes the centers don't have provision for food and drinks.
Yeah.
So this is something that actually Cherry and I, we sort of attended the same center. And what happened was I was expecting that, I could get like I could buy a cup of tea and have during my break. And well, they didn't really have provisions then. So yeah, make sure that you carry your own food, and maybe if you want to carry some beverages as well, you could do that. And some centers are well equipped, but some centers are not, and especially now with COVID, you don't really know what they're going to actually have in their centers. So make sure that you're well equipped for the D-Day. In fact, another point now that we're talking about this is also it could get quite cold in the session, so make sure that you carry like a hoodie or some sort of a sweater that you might want to just wear if it gets a bit too cold.
Yeah, I think so. And I think for some people, and I'm speaking for myself over here, sugar does wonders. So I remember carrying Snickers with me because you eat one Snickers bar, it's enough sugar. It's enough to keep you going for one whole session. So suit yourself, but definitely considering the COVID-19 situation, please carry something with yourself to eat and drink.
Yeah. Another question is there a pen and paper? Cherry, you want to take that?
Yeah, I remember receiving a laminated white sheet and a kind of a erasable pen. So it was one single sheet where we could do the calculations and then erase it and then just use it again and again and again. So that is something, but I would speak for the center where I was. It would be helpful again to just just pick up the phone, call the center and make sure what provisions they would be making. But they usually provide something.
Yeah, I think there's something that's provided on the side. It would either be a pen and paper or it would be like Cherry said, like an erasable screen. Another question is the computer system straightforward to use? Yes, I mean it's quite straightforward. It's just you'll have a screen where you would have to just read the instructions and then you sort of start the test and you just sort of answer the questions. But yeah, of course, I can understand sometimes it is a little, like I do remember getting a little nervous at times because I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't erasing all my answers or something like that, especially when I was in the review screen. But yeah, I mean, it's very straightforward, so you don't really have to worry about being a technically savvy person. Okay, so I think Cherry has already answered the question on the white space, so I'm gonna skip that. Any tips for property struggling with this? It is a common complaint that a lot of MCT candidates have about property. Well, I would just say again, try to focus on the topics that you can understand. Do a few practice questions again, because if you practice questions, you would sort of understand the concept as well. So I think definitely practicing questions on property will be useful. Cherry, do you have any tips on property?
I think so that for a subject like property, it's very important to understand the concepts. Once you understand the base of the concept, then it's easier to apply it. There are few people who adopt the approach of just learning things, but that is a bit risky proposition. You may or may not have your memory supporting you at that time. So practice as many questions as you can for property law. That would be my suggestion. And keep on revisiting the definitions. That really help.
Yeah. Another question is, when someone cannot go back to a mock for review answer, how is that marked? Well, they just they take into account what you've already marked. So let's say there's question number 1 and you've marked B as your answer, then they'll consider B as your answer. And that's why what Cherry said is very important. Don't leave it unanswered, because if you haven't left, I mean, if you obviously are not going to get a score if you haven't really answered the question, because this actually happens quite often. Once you've completed all your questions, sometimes you actually don't have time to go back to your mark for review answers. So you'll have to be like very selective. You can only choose a few questions that you can get back to. So make sure that you don't leave any question unanswered. Even if you don't know the answer, just guess something, mark it for review if you want to get back to it, and then you can deal with it at a later stage, because time is a big issue. Time can be a big issue with the MCT, and also because you do get tired as well, especially in the second session. So sometimes you can run out of time. What proportion of questions typically relate to solicitor's account tax? Well, I think the questions are typically equally divided amongst all the 11 subjects. So you're gonna see a few ups and downs here and there, but generally they're equally divided. Solicitor's account, bear in mind that you also have professional conduct as part of the subject. So you will have quite a few questions on professional conduct. So half of it is going to be professional conduct, and maybe another half solicitor's account. So maybe you can expect about 4 to 5 questions on solicitor's account, I would say, or maybe 7 max. On tax, again, I think tax is part of another subject. It's part of money laundering and financial services. That's what I remember. And so there again, I would say in terms of calculation, questions which involve calculations, you can expect about 4 to 5, or maybe again 7 max. That's what I would think. Okay, I think we've already answered this question of Giovanna, which is, if you've marked the question for review, but you've answered it and don't go back to it, does the answer count? Yes, the answer counts. How much break time are we given between the morning and the afternoon session? I think Cherry answered that question. It's about an hour.
About an hour that you get in between. Yeah. One thing that I would just like to add here, just have it at the top of my mind, is to make sure that you carry the necessary documents that allow you the entry. So make sure that if they ask you for your passport, let's say, for example, you carry that, and you carry an additional document as well. That would help you establish the identity. Please make sure you read your instructions very, very carefully before you start from your home.
Okay, another question is, interesting question in terms of questions, is the real exam simpler or harder than the mock questions that we solve from different providers? Well, good question. I can give you like my personal example, because I had taken QLTS school. Yeah, I did find the questions quite difficult, and I was sort of failing quite a few of them. So I was panicking before the exam. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the real exam was, I found it a little more simpler. But at the same time, I do know of a lot of other candidates who actually found the real exam more difficult. So it can be a little subjective. And also, it also depends on who is sort of setting the questions for the assessment. They are sort of making it more difficult, and they try to change as well the format of the level of difficulty of the questions. So I would say, the more you practice, the more confident you get. So try to practice as many questions as you can, so that when you actually attempt the real exam, you're sort of quite comfortable with, answering questions and answering difficult questions. Cherry, do you have anything any insights that you could add there?
I think I absolutely agree. Even I subscribed to QLTS school back then. And I remember discreetly that for some subjects, I found that they were easier than what I had attempted through QLTS school. For some subjects, the questions in the exam were tricky. So that is why it is very important to have your concepts very clear and practice as many questions. Now, I also remember there was a fair lot of questions for which I used the elimination trick. And that is something you are able to deploy only when you are used to practicing questions. So yeah, it totally depends upon how much you've practiced, and more often than not, a lot of people who have used the providers actually enter the exam and find the questions a bit more simpler.
Yeah. Is it safe to leave a topic completely, or every topic must be attempted, and has any pass criteria topic-wise? A good question. Actually, your score is based on your overall score, so they don't really look at your scores for each subject. So, and that's why I think, if there are certain topics that are difficult, you can actually leave it, because let's say you score 0 on solicitor's account, but you max your scores on the other subjects, you can still pass the exam. Just make sure that you're not leaving out too many topics. So try to maintain a balance, because sometimes you could have tough questions on some of the easy subjects as well. Okay, maybe Cherry, you could take this question. Are there questions based on case laws? Should we remember case laws for the MCT as well?
I think you would find a fair number of questions that would be case law based. Now, these can be based on two ways. You may find that there's actually facts of a case, and then there are options. And then you may find yourself in a situation that the facts relate to a case law, but the options are not relating to what you've read, what was the majority decision in that case law. So be very, very careful when you are driving yourself to answer such questions. Be extremely clear on what the majority and the minority decision was in the case laws. And very often you may also find yourself in a situation that, let's say, case law which is more relevant to contract, the same facts and the same situation has been put up in, let's say, tort or in some other subject or criminal. So be very, very mindful when you are answering these questions. Be alert, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I would also just say that, you don't really need to remember case laws for the MCT, because they're mostly just testing you on the concept. So they don't really expect you to memorize any case names or anything like that. But definitely they will provide you questions based on case laws. So yes, when you're reading, try and see how a particular case law has applied a concept. But you don't have to memorize case laws. So that's the good news. Do all these subjects carry equal proportion of marks? Yes, they try to sort of divide the questions equally amongst all the 11 subjects. Of course, like I said, there is a little bit of up and down here and there, but more often than not, it's pretty much equally divided. Do you happen to know if mock tests by QLTS School are representative of the real test questions? Yes, all the training providers try their best to make sure that they're sort of close to the actual mock tests, the actual assessment. So yeah, but again, don't expect it to be exactly same, because you could get surprises as well. So I would say be prepared for surprises in the assessment, because that's something that I've heard, the feedback that I've heard from other candidates as well, especially recently. They've said that what they sort of encountered in the assessment was slightly different from what the feeling that they got when they attempted questions by the training providers.
Priyasha, I have a question addressed to me privately over here, but I feel answering this would help everyone. So I'll just read out the question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Cherry. From your experience and speaking to other candidates as well, was it a problem finishing in time? I'm busy with mock exams at QLTS school, and I always finish the exam with 30 minutes left. Very good question. With my experience, I would say for the first part of the exam, I discreetly remember that it took me a very long time to finish. I had no time to go back to most of the questions that I had marked for review. So that was my situation in the first part. But then in the second part of exam, I think I finished like 30 minutes before the exam. So it totally depends on how the question paper has been set. Very often the examiner tries to maintain that balance because they are mindful of the fact that they're literally putting the candidates in captivity for a whole day. And they do bear that in mind when they set up the question paper. But having said that, it would be incorrect if you just rely on that. So I would say that if you're able to finish in time, excellent, very good. You've got that time to review your questions, even the ones that you haven't marked. But if you are not left with time, don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's good. That's definitely a good tip to bear in mind. Another question is, which material do you suggest? Where do you get practice questions? Well, if you subscribe to a training provider, then definitely they're going to provide you mock tests and practice questions. And if you haven't subscribed to a training provider, then we're trying to, like I said, fill that gap and provide candidates with practice questions and mock tests. So again, like I said, follow us on social media, or if you've opted in, we will send you an email when our mock tests and practice questions are live, which is hopefully very soon. I think so I'm having a look at this question. We've already answered that, so I'm not going to pick that up. When do you find out the results? A good question. That is generally within 3 to 4 weeks of taking the assessment. That's what, that was what was followed when we sort of took the assessment. I don't know about whether the timings have changed. Cherry, any insights there?
They do mention that it takes 4 to 6 weeks, but in my case, and I think in our case, Priyasha, we got it within a month, in less than 4 weeks, definitely.
Yeah, less than 4 weeks. What if I don't get time to go back to the mark to review question? Will it be counted? Again, I think we've answered this question. It will be counted if you've if you've sort of marked an answer, then they won't really take into account the fact that you've marked for review. All your answers all the questions that you've answered, it will be taken into account for your marks. How many questions do you need to have correct to pass the exam? The half of them consisting are 90? No, they actually look into your overall score. So they look into all the 180 questions that you've answered, and they look at your overall, marks on that. There is a specific way that they sort of calculate the passing score, but you can actually look at the historical figures on the Kaplan website. So that gives you an idea of the sort of percentage that you need to get to pass the assessment. I don't know, Cherry, whether you know at the top of your head what generally has been the average of the passing score?
Well, it keeps on varying. I would say anyway over 60%, but that keeps on differing from year to year. So yeah, I don't think this is something that anyone would be able to comment on. The pass marks change every year. Every year, they said in the presentation as well that it is determined with every exam.
Yeah, I would just say that they do publish the historical pass scores. So just have a look at that on the Kaplan website. When are you doing the OSCE, and will you do a session like this after the OSCE as well? Yeah, we will definitely have another session on the OSCE as well, because I know it can be quite daunting. And I think maybe the question is for Cherry, when are you going to take the OSCE? Because that is a question that a lot of people who have completed the MCT or who are taking the MCT have. Do you have any, maybe, I know you know a little bit of updates there, so do you want to just talk about that?
Well, had the world not been this dangerous to travel, I would have taken OSCE in July, but sadly that's not happening. I'm hoping that in November, the travel restrictions would be easier. The quarantine restrictions would not be as insane as they are right now. So if that if everything is well and I'm not required to go 14 days before the exam, then November would be the time I would take the exam.
Mm. Any trick for solicitor's account? As I mentioned, we're going to have another session on solicitor's account very soon. So follow again, sort of watch our social media space for the date and time. In terms of tricks, I would, but one thing that I would definitely say is that there is a certain pattern that's, you know, the question and answer sort of follow. You know, and so if you know these little tricks, you can actually eliminate the wrong answers. So try to sort of, at least if you don't understand the concept, try to see what the pattern is. And simple tricks like, you know, you shouldn't have debit and debit in the same sort of line. Okay, anyways, I think I should better leave this for the session on solicitor's account. But, you know, these are the simple sort of examples that sort of would help you answer a question on solicitor's account and eliminate the wrong answers. Do you generally find, maybe Cherry, you could answer this question. Do you generally find certain subjects allotted to part 1 and part 2, or is it a mix of all subjects in both parts?
I would say it's a good mix of all subjects in both parts. I mean, sometimes in one of the exams, you would find that for certain subjects, there are more questions, but then in the second part, there would be slightly less. From my experience, I remember in one part, there was just too much solicitor's account, and I was like, okay, what happened? But then correspondingly, in the second part, I was relieved. So I would say that don't worry about how the questions are allocated, because it's a very balanced mix.
Yeah, the next question is actually very good because this is something that I'd also like to talk about. Is the timer on the screen up for each exam taker's self-time setting? Yeah, I mean, yes. Essentially, the timer begins right when you click on start the test. So, you know, if your neighbor has started, let's say 5 minutes back, then that's not an issue. It essentially, the timer starts when you press start the test. Also, another thing to bear in mind is that, you know, again, I don't know, Cherry, maybe if you remember, but from what I recollect, the timer started from like, let's say 165 minutes to 0, you know, so I was a little like taken aback when I saw that because I was expecting it to start from 0 to 165. So I got a little thrown aback because I had sort of in my head, I had decided that, okay, you know, I had these landmarks that, okay, you know, I should complete, let's say 40 questions by, let's say, you know, 30 minutes or something like that. So when it was sort of, when the timer was running backwards, I was a little confused about how to sort of, you know, how to sort of gauge my progress. So just be prepared for, like I said, how to sort of manage your time and how to sort of divide your time between each questions. Of course, I think if you're good at math, you wouldn't have an issue. But because I was a little, you know, sort of nervous when I was taking the test, I got a bit thrown off course. Did you get thrown off course, Cherry, with the timer, or was it okay for you?
Yeah, I think so. When I saw the timer, then yes. But then I was like, okay, this is what it is. I really
Yeah.
can't bother about it. Let's just get my mind used to the back counting and make sure that I'm following certain allocated time for every question and go ahead.
Yeah. With the date of the exam close by, would you suggest we focus on practicing questions now rather than trying to complete the topics? I would say definitely practice questions. You can, I would still say that you can try to read up new topics, but just make sure that you're not getting bogged down by it, you know? So let's say that you're reading property tomorrow and then you spend the next 3-4 days just focusing on property. I would say that's probably not a wise approach because you want to divide your time equally between all the subjects. So if you're getting stuck somewhere, try to just move on and try to just read only certain topics within the subject. And at the same time, practice questions as well simultaneously. So maybe one approach that I would do is maybe practice one mock every 2 or 3 days. Also divide my day into practicing questions as well as studying. So you could start with doing a little bit of reading in the day, Then maybe when you're bored reading, you can actually do practice questions. And then once you're done with practice questions, you can again get back to reading or reading the stuff that, you need to sort of learn better. Like, for example, based on the mock tests that or based on the practice questions that you've attempted. So yeah, I mean, I think following like a balanced approach is very useful for the MCT. So you want to make sure that you're studying as well as you're practicing questions. Great. Okay, this is a question. When you say you weren't passing the mocks before the exam, if you were scoring below 55% at the moment on the mocks, should we be taking advantage of the opportunity to withdraw and sit the Jan 2021, or is that still enough to go ahead? Well, to be really honest with you, I do remember scoring below 55% in a lot of mock tests. Let's say 2 weeks before the assessment, or even a week before the assessment. So I did panic, but ultimately I did end up. I sort of ended up clearing the MCT. So, Cherry, do you have any particular insights there?
Well, I would say don't get dissuaded by what score you are scoring on any service provider's mock tests. Always remember that these mock tests are designed in a way to prepare you. And with every test that you attempt, you actually open up your mind to more possibilities. So I would definitely encourage you to take the exam. If you feel you're ready, you've covered the syllabus enough to attempt, let's say, 80% of the exam, I would really encourage you to go ahead with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice. I would say attempt it. Sometimes in the last minute, what happens is people do tend to panic. I mean, I think I must have panicked, but I would still say go ahead, attempt it. Don't wait till Jan 2021. The reason being, we don't really know how things are going to be with the QLTS once the SQE comes up, and they are going to be limited MCTs now. So my fear for the Jan 2021 is that I think there are going to be so many people who would want to sign up for it that the slots are going to get filled up very quickly. So I think it's going to be very difficult to find a seat in Jan 2021. Which is why my advice also from this perspective is as soon as the bookings open, don't think twice. If you know you want to take the QLTS, just sign up for it as soon as the booking opens, because seats fill up very quickly for the MCT. And given that nobody knows how many more MCTs are going to be conducted, I think everyone's going to be in the rush to register. So, if you have a seat for July or August, just go for it. Do we need to memorize all current applicable taxation thresholds and rates for the purpose of the QLTS exam? Cherry, do you want to take this?
Sure. Well, as far as I can remember, with questions, they do provide you with the basic slabs. Now, you will have to keep in mind certain reliefs that you will have to apply to the calculation, and those reliefs are standard. So they may not provide you because then they're actually giving out the answer to you. But slabs, which change every year, they provide you with the fresh slabs. So don't worry about memorizing those.
Yeah, I think that's right. They try to, MCT is a little less about memorizing. It's all about application of, questions. So most of the times they do provide you with the taxation thresholds and rates. Another question is, how is Barbary? Yeah, this sort of a relatively new entrant. I've had reasonably good reviews of Barbary, but well, I don't really know too much of it because they're sort of quite new into the market. So I would definitely suggest reaching out to somebody who's taken their course. Have you heard of the BCPS provider? Do you think that questions will be more like SQE already? I don't think questions will be more like the SQE, because the SQE, I do notice that some of the questions cover multiple topics. So the MCT, generally, each question will be sort of restricted to one subject. So I don't really think they will be like the SQE. Cherry, have you heard of BCPS provider?
Not really.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, sorry, we don't really know that. Okay, another question is, I gave MCT in Jan 2020. I scored 54% and 58% was passing. Should I reappear in Jan 2021 or should I wait for the new SQE? Does SQE seem to be more difficult and in-depth study? Well, my personal view is that the QLTS is like an easier route to, it seems like an easier route to take right now because it's predictable. We know what the QLTS is. The problem with the SQE is that it's quite uncertain, and you're also competing with people from the UK who've studied in the UK. So the threshold is going to be a little, higher in terms of, expectations, I would say. On the other hand, QLTS, like for example, MCT only has 180 questions, multiple choice questions, but SQE, your first part is 360 multiple choice questions. So that's double. It's quite a lot. And you can also gauge the difficulty by having a look at the practice questions for SQE, because Kaplan, I think the SRA has, not Kaplan, the SRA has issued, a question bank of about 90 questions for the SQE. So I would say have a look at it and see what you think about it. But I think the SQE is going to be a little more difficult, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the SQE, which is why my personal opinion is, if you are sure that you want to take the, you want to qualify as a solicitor in the UK, then just go ahead, take the QLTS. It's a very straightforward route. You just have to clear the MCT, you have to clear the OSCE, and then you submit your papers and you become a solicitor. With the SQE, things are quite uncertain, and it's it's very hard to predict at this stage how it's going to be for a foreign lawyer. Cherry, do you have any insights? I mean, do you have any other points to add?
No, I think Priyasha, you summed it up very well. I would say back in the day when QLTT was there and QLTS was not announced, people who have cleared QLTT say that it was an easier way to go. And then when QLTS is introduced, it's slightly more difficult. So every time there is a modification to the pattern of the exam, the bar is raised. So if you feel you are prepared, this totally depends on at what point you are with your preparations. This is something for you to gauge. And if you feel that you are at a point that you are confident and you can take this exam, please go ahead. Please take it whilst you still have the opportunity of exploiting QLTS.
Yes. Can videos be a good substitute where there is not enough time to read a study note? My personal answer is yes. That's what I did for the MCT as well, because I hated reading the books. So I would watch the videos. What I did was I used to watch the videos, video lectures. Then I would sort of attempt the mock questions, and for the sort of areas where I wasn't sure, I would sort of read up the book. So I think videos definitely are a good substitute, and I think all modern sort of millennials, especially, I think we sort of study better visually. So yeah, I think videos help. Yeah, I think. Will your practice questions be available before MCT July? Yes, we are working towards that, and you will receive an update very soon. Do you receive a pass or a fail or an actual percentage? Cherry, you want to take that?
Yeah, we did receive an actual percentage, and then of course followed by the result, whether you have passed or you failed. So you do receive your percentage.
Oh yeah, I see that somebody has already shared the pass mark and the pass rate. So thank you very much for that. See, you can actually see the pass mark is about 57%. So this gives you an indication that, you can actually leave out certain topics and get away with it. So if So don't get too hung up on any particular topic if you think that it's going to be it's taking too much time. Is the OSCE more difficult than the MCT? Good question. Some people have said they find OSCE more easier. Personally, I found the OSCE a little bit more difficult because you have to travel to London. First of all, the logistics involved is quite a lot. Second is it's spread over 6 days, so it's quite a long sort of exam to assessment to sort of deal with. Third is you sort of, there's so many hoops to sort of cross. You have to do a presentation, you have to do advocacy. I'm a corporate lawyer, so I wasn't sort of used to a lot of things with respect to litigation, so I had to spend a little bit more time understanding that. Also, time management is quite crazy for OSCE. You do run out of time, and you have to be at your best on all the 6 days. Sometimes it's not easy. So yeah, I would definitely say OSCE can be a little more challenging. But yeah, we're going to cover another session on clearing the OSCE as well, and hopefully that's also useful for a lot of you. Is it possible to read independently from home without using any training providers? Cherry, you might be able to answer that question because I think people who've done that.
Yes, I don't think subscribing to a training provider is mandatory to clear this exam. I have several friends who picked up the books, studied from the books, and they've cleared the exam in the very first attempt. So there are several ways you can get access to the study material. You can ask your friends for notes. You can ask for people, you can reach out on LinkedIn for people who have cleared the exam for their notes. You can pick up the OUP books. In a sense, they all say the same. This is where all the training providers derive their notes from. So definitely you can clear this exam without subscribing to any training provider.
Yeah, I mean, the OUP bits are, as Cherry mentioned, quite useful. The only part where you might have a little bit of difficulty is accessing practice questions. And that's where we're trying to sort of fill the gap and make sure that, practice questions are available to those who can't afford a training provider. How many more MCTs are left? As I mentioned, we're not sure. Jan 2021 seems to be the one that we know for sure is going to happen. So I don't think it's going to be more difficult or easy, but I would just say that, make sure that you sign up for it before it fills up. Do they allow toilet breaks or water breaks during the test? You can take a toilet break, but the timer is going to run and you'll have to I think you'll have to sign in, sign out, as you go out of the room. So that sort of takes time. I would say try to avoid taking a toilet break in between. So make sure that, you sort of are well prepared before you start the test. You can carry water into the test center, to this test area. So that's not a problem.
This is where I would just like to add something.
Yeah.
This is where when during the presentation I mentioned that if there are any special circumstances, please inform the center. I remember when I took the test, there was a lady at the center who was pregnant and she definitely couldn't sit through 2 hours and 45 minutes. So she had informed the center well in advance. And if I'm not, I speak under correction, but she was allowed certain time on medical grounds when she had to go take the toilet break. So if there are any special circumstances surrounding you, please communicate that to the center in advance. And they will make sure that they make arrangements for you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Cherry. Yeah, special circumstances, they do take into account. What are the best video lectures in your opinion? Do you plan to do these ones too? Yes, I subscribe to one of the training providers, which is QLTS School. And yeah, their video lectures were, I would say, definitely useful. I don't remember which were the best ones though, but yeah, they were just generally useful for me, especially when I came back from my, especially, after a hard day's work, you don't want to be reading books. So videos definitely was useful. What sort of scores were you getting on the mock tests? What were your highest scores? Cherry, you want to answer that?
Well, I think I would have started from 40% passing, which was very depressing to be very honest. But that was kind of giving me the spirit to go ahead and take up more tests as well. That was the point when I realized that reading is not sufficient and how important practicing is. I think the highest I would have scored would be somewhere between 55 to 60 in the mock tests. But
I
my
agree.
scores were way higher than what I was scoring on the service providers tests.
Uh, can I have a recording of the meeting? Yes, we are going to be recording. I mean, we are recording the meeting, and we will upload this on YouTube with timestamps. So you can definitely access uh, this webinar. How do you access OUP material? Uh, I mean, this is what I know. OUP material, you would have to buy the hard copies. I think they have soft copies as well, Cherry, right? But I'm not sure how sort of user friendly it is. Are you aware of this, Cherry?
I don't have a personal experience with using the soft copies, but I do know that they have their material available online. So please get in touch with them, particularly in these circumstances, in the entire COVID-19 situation. I do remember a few friends mentioning that they're coming up with all these, I mean, they're providing all the online books and books in the soft format, soft copy format. So I personally had QLTS school, so I really did not buy OUP material. But if you're keen on buying that, or you are looking at buying that for, let's say, OSCE purposes, then it would be better in these circumstances to order the soft copies.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people who haven't really received their OUP books yet. So
Yes.
that can be a bit of a problem during COVID times. Do the GDL notes have good summaries for use about 2 weeks before the exam? I actually don't know. But I would say that Law Answered, they have like good sort of notes for last minute studies. So if you have access to some of the Law Answered GDL notes, that would definitely help you because they're quite concise. So check out Law Answered definitely for notes if you want to do something quick, last minute before the assessment. Do you know when booking for Jan 2021 will be opened? I would say maybe sometime around after. I think it's generally after the July assessment. That's when they open bookings. I know there's an August session as well, so I don't really know when they're going to actually do it this time, but I would assume it should be after the July session. Our YouTube channel is QLTS Geek. Actually, another video that I would actually like to share with all of you is, let me just share it with everyone, is it's a video by Kaplan, and it's a video on what to expect on the assessment days. So have a look at that, because it's nothing special, but what they do show you is they show you the picture, they show you videos of the centers and how you sort of be how how you sort of be it sort of gives you an idea about what to expect on actually the assessment day. So definitely check out. I've just shared it on chat. Yes, Arifa just shared. You can actually find online soft copies of all Law Answered. They're actually quite user friendly, so definitely check them out if you can't access the OUP books. Is there any free content available for somebody to get started? Not, unfortunately, for QLTS, there's not too much of free content that you can access. So it can be a little expensive. Were you both working full-time when preparing for the MCT? Any tips to prevent burnout? Yes, we were both working full time. Cherry, any tips there?
Uh, okay, so I was actually in a situation that just 1 month before the exam, I joined a new job, and there was this entire pressure of performing and the probation period and everything. What I would say from my experience is that consistency is the key. You need to have a timetable. You need to commit yourself to the exam. So at any point, you need to understand how you function and then allocate certain numbers of hours in the day towards the preparation. In these times, if you've got access to video lectures, they are extremely helpful. The more you practice, the better you get. So just hang in there. It's doable. It's not something that you will not be able to do with a full-time job. That's my take on it. What helped me was, again, I did have access to a few video lectures of mock questions. So whenever I would have time, I would actually do those, and that was really helpful.
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of my weekends studying. So definitely there is an element of burnout because, you know, your weekends, you're already, I mean, I was working at a law firm, so you're already tired. And then again, the weekend you have to spend studying. So it definitely is a challenge working and studying. But I would still say that you can do it while working, and, you know, it's rewarding once you do pass the assessments. So you don't need to quit your job to do it, or you don't need to take crazy long breaks, but make sure that you for the OSCE, definitely you would have to take a long break, but for the MCT, you can take a few days maybe off before the assessment, and that might just help you prepare for the, you know, be mentally prepared for the assessment. I know we've sort of crossed the time limit, so we can take a few questions, but if anybody has to drop off, please do. And we're going to share this webinar anyways. And Cherry as well, if you need to leave, you can, because Cherry, in case you have anything else lined up, please do.
No, I think we can definitely take a few more
Take a few more
questions.
questions. Okay, perfect.
Even after the webinar, if you guys have any questions, Priyasha and I are quite active on LinkedIn. Please feel free to shoot your questions.
Yeah, I think we're anyways down to the last couple of questions. There's a question by somebody who says, you know, are the questions simple in the MCT mock? Like, are they very straightforward? Like, when do judges retire? Or how many judges can sit for a particular case? Yeah, generally the questions will not be that simple. They will be a little more like case study type. Of course, it's helpful to know these questions, I mean, these facts, because they could sort of build that into a case study, but the questions will not be this straightforward. Any calendar you can share to see how much time you used working and studying at the same time? How much are you going to charge for providing practice questions and mocks? Like I said, we're going to be releasing our the web portal pretty soon, so you can have definitely you'll get to know when we do sort of release it. But our aim is to sort of keep it very cost effective, because we want to make sure that, you know, content is easily accessible to and affordable to candidates. So we're going to have actually a pay as you go model. So you only pay for what you consume and what you'd like to consume. How do you divide your time working and studying? I would just say that maybe aim at spending about a couple of hours a day during your work days. It's not always possible, but you can do that, especially if you're preparing like 4 months in advance of the MCT. Try to focus more of your heavy duty studying in the weekends, because that's when your mind is clear. And I think that's the most judicious way to use your time when you're working.
If I may add something over here, what may work very well for some of you would be to get a study partner, because what happens then is that you are not accountable to yourself and you are accountable to somebody else as well. And that kind of acts as a mental, a force that that, you know, by the end of the week, you would like, okay, no, I have to answer this person. Let me just take out some time and study. So it would be very, very good if you could find a study partner for yourself and both of you set your weekly targets, or let's say daily targets. And it's also very good to bounce questions off each other whenever you've got a doubt or any kind of a problem. You can just drop a WhatsApp to the other person and the other person can reply. So that will also help you dedicate yourself more.
Yeah, good point. Study buddies are very useful. So if you have study partners, then especially for the OSCE, I would say it's very useful to practice mocks and practice questions. So it's always good to have like a group where you sort of follow your progress with. Um, any tips not to overthink the question? Any other question strategy? Yeah, like I said, make sure try to keep in mind that you have about 2 minutes to answer a question. So if you are finding yourself that you're overthinking it, then just click on make an intelligent guess, mark for review, and you can sort of come back to answer the question at a later stage. And sometimes what happens is that you actually get the answer subconsciously after you've sort of answered a few more questions. So as you sort of complete your test, you actually might get an idea about how to answer a previous question that you've marked as review. So definitely don't, if you find yourself spending too much time on a question, just move on. You can always get back. And when you get back, you might actually have a fresh mind. Would you like another question? I mean, it's not a question, but a suggestion is to prepare a WhatsApp group. Yeah, definitely. I think there are a lot of WhatsApp groups floating around, but we've also asked for numbers from a lot of you. So we might actually create a group on our app based on the numbers that you shared. And yeah, definitely, we want to make sure that it's a nice community where people can help each other. So we're definitely aiming at creating some sort of a community or group. Another good question: do you usually go with your first gut feel answer and not change answers, or is reviewing questions worthwhile? I would say your gut feel answer is generally the right one, but sometimes you don't know the answer, and so you still have to mark some answer, and and you might have to come back to it later. But yeah, generally your first gut feel is the actual answer. So don't second guess yourself. Sometimes when you're marking for review. Cherry, what do you think about this?
Yes, I think when we see the answers, there are certain questions that we know that we don't know the answer to them. So just mark any random option that you are feeling that day and don't go back to them unless something clicks. First gut feel, yes, usually that gut feeling is based on the preparation that you've done. So most of the times when you feel that that is the answer, just mark it, go by it, and you can always come back to that. And if you still find yourself in a grave dilemma, in a very grave dilemma, then you may have to take a judgment call. But usually those answers are, for me, they've been the right answers.
Yeah, that's true. If we pass MCT on Jan 2021, how many attempts will we have for the OSCE? So according to the guidelines released by the SRA, you will have about a year to clear the OSCE once the SQE is introduced. So I would assume that 2022 November, September could be like the last OSCE. Having said that, I think it would be unfair to the QLTS candidates to have such a short time frame, particularly with COVID and the fact that people are not able to travel. So I think the SRA could relax it a little bit, but we can't say for sure. The SRA has announced that they will, towards the end of the year, sort of issue some guidelines on, when on what has been the effect of COVID for all these assessments. So yeah, I mean, I would say, but still, I would say, try to assume that we shouldn't be making assumptions. So like I said, you will have about a year from the introduction of the SQE to actually clear your OSCE. And I think there is another guideline here, and I could be wrong. So Cherry, you could actually supplement my answer. I think you will have a limit to the number of takes, or once you cleared the MCT in 2021.
Well, you can only extend it. You can only take OSCE as long as OSCE is being offered. So there's no limit on that. But then the attempts them itself would be limited. You see, you would. As you've mentioned, that only up to a year after the SQ is introduced, you would have the OSCE coming in. So once you stop the OSCE, then you just don't have any option.
Yeah, that's true. You have a limited time, so but like I said, make the most of the time. Some people are not sure if they would actually be able to take the OSCE within the 1 year time frame. So I do know that especially law students, they are thinking of actually focusing on the SQE, which makes sense. But if you're a practicing lawyer, if you know you really want to qualify as a solicitor, then the QLTS is a good option. I think the only hitch is the 1 year time frame, but I would say that most qualified lawyers will be able to clear it within that 1 year time frame. It's only if you're a law student and you haven't really been out there, you might have that doubt whether you can clear it within that 1 year period. Okay, perfect. So I think we've answered a lot of these questions. Well, thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Cherry, as well, for all your tips and insights. Any parting thoughts, Cherry?
Well, I would just encourage everyone particularly for people who are now appearing in July, to be very focused. Whatever you've done is enough. Revise that, study well, and good luck. And for those who are planning to take exam in January, just start with your preparations. It always helps to have certain extra time at hand, and you never know how the circumstances unfold. So good luck to everyone out there.
Yeah, good luck to everyone as well. I think one final question before we sign off. Should I get a high score for the MCT? As I mentioned, your goal is to pass. Of course, getting a high score is amazing. But if you don't have much time, then I would say focus on passing. No one's going to ask you how much you scored for the MCT. All they would want to know is, have you cleared your QLTS? So don't get too bogged down. Yeah.
MCT scores do not get you any leverage in OSCE, believe me. So it's absolutely immaterial. You just focus on passing.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for attending today's session. I know it sort of extended beyond the 1 hour. But yeah, we look forward to sort of interacting with you for some of our further sessions. Thanks so much. Good night, guys.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye, everyone.